Right there at our big family Thanksgiving dinner in Omaha, my mother stood up with that polished smile and declared to everyone, "At least the Army barely pays her rent these days." The laughter exploded instantly. My older sister Taylor joining in the loudest. "My name is Samantha Reed. I am 32 years old." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest, her casual dismissal cutting straight through any remaining hope I had held on to. The painful silence from her afterward made the betrayal feel complete and devastating. That moment sparked something irreversible deep inside me. Before I tell you how that night changed everything, like and subscribe. If family drama like this hits close to home, comment your city below. I would love to hear where you are watching from. I sat there frozen while the jokes kept coming, my mother never once looking my way as she soaked up the approval from the table. My father just chuckled along like it was all harmless fun. My older sister Taylor leaned over and whispered something that made my mother laugh even harder. I had spent 17 years proving myself in uniform, burying good people under desert skies, yet none of that mattered in this room. The uniform I wore home for the holiday suddenly felt like a costume they could mock without consequence. That was the night I finally stopped hoping my mother would see me as more than a failure who chose service over her real estate empire. The next morning, I drove back to base with the words still ringing in my ears. I had enlisted 17 years earlier against her explicit orders. She had wanted me in the family business closing deals and smiling for clients, but I had placed my papers on the kitchen table and watched her face harden. "If you walk out that door, do not expect anything from me," she had said then. I did not ask for anything. I packed a single bag and left in the rain the same way I had done every time her expectations tried to chain me down. Years later, I learned she had buried more than just my choices. She had pushed my own mother, her late mother-in-law, out of a promising engineering career in the military because it did not fit the image she wanted for the family name. Colorado Springs had taught me discipline the hard way, long days and sharper nights. I sent letters home every month out of stubborn habit. None ever came back. When I missed her approval, I read the old note my grandmother had left me: "Fight for purpose, not permission." It became my compass when the missions blurred together. Then came the overseas assignment where everything shifted. One night during a housing inspection for forward bases, our system went dark. The faulty wiring in a new barracks module collapsed, killing 5 young soldiers, including Private Ethan Gray, only 25 years old. The logs showed the wiring had been altered to save costs on my mother's company contracts. I filed a report. 72 hours later, the file vanished from the system like it had never existed. I did not understand the full picture then, but I do now. My mother had used her influence to bury the investigation and protect her growing portfolio of military housing deals. She chose profit over lives. That was the night I stopped sending letters. Instead, I wrote after-action reports and quiet oaths to myself. I rose in rank. I learned composure. But inside, a different war kept breathing. I swore that if I ever stood in a position to force the truth into the light, I would not raise my voice. I would simply stand where she would be forced to look up and see me. Years after the desert, the world stopped shooting at me, but reports still landed like shrapnel. At my desk in Peterson, I read them slowly, looking for the truth between the lines. That morning, the inbox banner hit like an order. My mother's company shortlisted for an $11 billion contract. The review fell to me. The number carried weight. $11 billion was not just ledger entries, it was reputation influence, the monument my mother had spent a lifetime building on the backs of people she never had to bury. The same company whose shortcuts had taken Ethan Gray and 4 others. I called my friend Captain Isabella Moore and met her in a quiet coffee shop off base, her uniform crisp, her eyes tired. I slid the old error log across the table. She did not deny what she had seen. She admitted my mother had insisted on the cost changes, calling it smart business. It had not been smart to Private Ethan Gray. It had been deadly enough to disappear an investigation 3 full days after I filed it. Captain Isabella Moore warned me that going public would not just pit me against my mother, it would pit me against a system that preferred contracts over accountability. The wind outside felt cold. If this was war, it would have to be a war of exposure. 10 days later, I received the call that my grandmother's old files had surfaced. My mother had been sorting through storage after a move and had missed one box. Inside were original reports with her own initials on the cover page. She had kept them, maybe hoping no one would ever need them. Night bled into dawn as I read everything. The city outside stayed indifferent. I left with the documents tucked in my pack, aware I had flipped a switch I could not undo. Then Captain Isabella Moore sent a text. "Your mother knows about the file. She wants you at the company anniversary event next month." I closed the phone and let a small, steady smile form. Neither of us was who we used to be. The plane dropped through gray skies and Omaha glimmered below like a warning. This time, I was not coming home to visit. I was coming to stand on the stage she had built. At the Pentagon, the air felt sterilized, the kind that carries secrets. The security director briefed me in a calm voice. The Defense Housing Review was set for the coming weeks. My mother's company would be the lead presenter. There was never an among where my mother was concerned. There was only first, only her empire, only the woman who had never believed I would amount to anything. The corridors hummed as I walked back to my office, my boots counting down to confrontation. That night, I opened the folder again. Her initials marked one corner cold and deliberate. Tomorrow, I whispered, I would choose truth. My phone buzzed. Captain Isabella Moore's message blinked through. "Your mother is preparing to announce the contract secured at the event. She does not think you will show." I typed back one line. "Then she is about to be surprised." Later, I discovered the files I had submitted had been quietly clipped by someone inside with a stake in her company. Another message from Kevin Turner arrived. Emails proving my mother had pressured officials for years. Each line stripped away any illusion of redemption. There was no way back. Outside, the city gleamed under wet haze, reflecting light like glass and guilt. Tomorrow would not be about revenge. It would be about truth, standing in the open, finally unafraid. The company anniversary event looked the same as always, polished marble and heavy chandeliers. But the air was charged. The last time I stood in a room like this, I had been invisible. Tonight, every step echoed. Attendants nodded as I passed in full dress uniform. My older sister Taylor spotted me first and whispered to my mother. My heartbeat matched the quiet rhythm of the orchestra in the distance. I did not look toward the head table until I heard her voice. My mother stood under the spotlight, shaking hands, her smile sharp enough to cut. She spoke about progress and the brilliance of her legacy. Then, like a reflex, she turned her charm into cruelty. "My daughter serves in the military," she said, "and at least it keeps her rent paid." Laughter rippled until the host's next announcement froze at mid-breath. "The Oversight Committee is honored to welcome Brigadier General Samantha Reed." My heels struck the marble like gunfire. Every head turned. My mother's glass slipped. The laughter died. Captain Isabella Moore met me halfway, extending a hand. "We are proud to have you lead tonight," she said, voice cutting through the silence. Cameras flashed. I saluted the flag, not the woman who had built her fortune on shortcuts. I took the microphone steady and calm. "Progress without integrity is not progress," I said. "It is danger dressed up to sell." No applause followed, only the sound of truth landing where it belonged. The presentation began, but the screen shifted. The leaked report filled the wall, my mother's initials glowing against the shame. She turned to me, face drained. "What did you do? What you taught me?" I answered quietly. "Protect the brand. Only this one is called truth." Before the night ended, Captain Isabella Moore leaned toward me. "Your testimony is scheduled before the review board next month." I nodded. "I will be there." As the crowd thinned, my mother's voice followed me, strained. "Samantha." I stopped but did not turn. "You think you have won?" she called. "You just destroyed everything I built." I faced her then, the lights glinting along my uniform. "Maybe you built it wrong." The words hung in the air between us as the crowd began to disperse, leaving my mother standing there with her face drained of color and the weight of what I had just done settling on her shoulders. She did not say anything more that night, but I knew the silence would not last. The drive back to my hotel felt longer than the flight from Washington, every streetlight reminding me that this was only the beginning of the storm I had unleashed. By the time I reached my room, the first text had already arrived from my older sister. She wrote that I had gone too far and that my mother was in tears for the first time in years. I set the phone down without replying because I refused to let guilt pull me back into old patterns. The next morning, my mother called before I even finished my coffee. Her voice came sharp and controlled at first, the way it always did when she wanted to remind me who held the power. "How dare you embarrass me like that in front of people who matter?" She said, each word slicing through the line. "You always were the one who ruined things for this family with your little army fantasies." I listened without interrupting while she listed every sacrifice she claimed to have made for me, turning my service into proof that I had never appreciated her. She ended the call with an ultimatum wrapped in sweetness. "Fix this before the review board meets, or you will never be welcome in my home again." The click on the other end left me staring at the wall, realizing she had just threatened to erase me completely if I did not back down. My older sister called 30 minutes later, her tone sweeter, but the message the same. She said my mother had barely slept and that I owed her an explanation at the very least. "You know how hard she worked to build everything," my older sister added with that familiar edge. "One signature from you and this all goes away. Why make her suffer when you could just let it slide?" I told her the soldiers who died deserved better than a cover-up, but she laughed softly like I had told a joke. That conversation ended with her reminding me that blood was thicker than some report, and suddenly the family I had fought for felt like another front in the war. I hung up wondering how many times they had practiced that script together before dialing my number. Captain Isabella Moore met me at a small cafe off base that afternoon, her uniform as crisp as ever, but her eyes carrying the same worry I felt. She slid a fresh folder across the table and kept her voice low while she explained the latest developments. Kevin Turner had reached out again this time with documents that changed everything I thought I knew. The faulty wiring shortcuts had not started 4 years ago like I believed. They had been happening quietly for 11 years across 9 different housing projects, and my mother had signed off on every single cost-saving change that led to unsafe conditions. Private Ethan Gray had been one of 7 young soldiers lost, not the only one, and the company had paid quiet settlements to keep families silent. The revelation hit me harder than any explosion because it meant the betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, stretching back to the very first time I questioned her business practices. Kevin Turner joined us by video call from a secure line, his face tired but determined as he walked us through the new files. "She knew about the risks from the start," he said quietly. "I have emails where she told engineers to bury the safety tests so the contracts would keep flowing." Captain Isabella Moore leaned in and warned me that releasing everything now could trigger an immediate investigation, but it would also put my own career on the line if the system decided to protect its contractors instead of its officers. The 3 of us sat there mapping out the next steps while the cafe noise faded into background hum. Kevin promised to send the full packet by morning, but he added one last detail that sent a chill through me. My mother had already started calling in favors with board members to discredit my review before it even began. That was the moment I realized the fight had moved from public exposure to something far more personal and dangerous. 38 days passed in a blur of late-night calls and sealed envelopes. My mother's pressure never let up. She sent messages through my father at first asking him to remind me of family loyalty, but when that failed, she started leaving voicemails that mixed guilt with threats. "You are throwing away everything I gave you for strangers who signed up for risk," she said in one. "Do not come crying to me when your rank disappears and you are left with nothing." My older sister joined the campaign by posting vague family stories on social media. that painted me as the ungrateful daughter who turned her back on success. Each post collected likes from people who had no idea what really happened overseas, and the comments stung more than I wanted to admit. I kept working through the evidence meeting Captain Isabella Moore after hours to cross-check every line, but the weight of it all started pressing on my sleep and my focus at work. Then Kevin Turner sent the final batch that flipped the story again. Buried in the older files was proof that my grandmother had tried to warn my mother years earlier about the same cost-cutting dangers in an earlier project. My mother had not just ignored her, she had quietly pushed her out of any advisory role and then used the family name to silence questions. The hidden truth landed like a second betrayal because it showed my mother had chosen profit over family long before I ever enlisted. I sat alone in my quarters that night rereading the notes my grandmother had left me, the ones that suddenly carried new meaning. Captain Isabella Moore called right after I finished, her voice tight with urgency. She had heard through back channels that my mother was preparing a preemptive statement to the review board claiming I had personal grudges and could not be trusted. The trap was closing faster than I expected. I spent the next week preparing my testimony while the pressure built from every direction. My father reached out once, his voice softer than my mother's but still carrying her words. He asked if I really wanted to destroy the company that had kept our family comfortable all those years. When I reminded him about the soldiers who never came home, he went quiet for a long moment before saying my mother would never forgive me if I went through with it. The conversation ended with him sighing that some things were better left buried, and I realized even he had known pieces of the truth without ever speaking up. Captain Isabella Moore stayed by my side through every late strategy session, offering quiet support that kept me steady when doubt tried to creep in. Kevin Turner risked his own position by feeding us one last document that proved my mother had personally deleted safety reports just days after Private Ethan Gray's death. Each new piece made the picture clearer and the stakes higher. The morning of the review board finally arrived under gray Nebraska skies. I stood outside the hearing room in full uniform, folder in hand, heart steady, but racing beneath the surface. Captain Isabella Moore squeezed my shoulder and whispered that the truth would stand, no matter what happened inside. Just as I reached for the door, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was short-signed, only with my mother's initial, and it carried a warning that stopped me cold. Walk in there, and every record of your own past mistakes comes out too. Think carefully, daughter. I stared at the screen while the door waited behind me, knowing the next step would either end the lies or cost me everything I had built. The choice felt heavier than any mission I had ever flown, and for the first time I wondered if the price of truth might be more than I could afford to pay. I took a deep breath, slipped the phone into my pocket, and pushed open the heavy door to the review board chamber. The room was packed with officials, contractors, and a few reporters who had caught wind of the tension. My mother sat at the far end of the witness table in a tailored suit that screamed control, flanked by her legal team, and my father looking uncomfortable beside her. My older sister Taylor had chosen a seat in the back row, arms crossed, eyes locked on me like I was the enemy instead of the one trying to fix what had been broken for years. Captain Isabella Moore stood just inside the door, giving me a small nod of support, while Kevin Turner waited in the hallway for his turn to testify. The chairwoman called the session to order, and right away, my mother leaned forward to speak first. She did not waste a second. Before we began, my mother said, her voice smooth, but laced with that familiar edge, I need everyone here to understand that my daughter has harbored a personal grudge against my company for years. She enlisted against my wishes, ignored every opportunity I offered, and now she is using her rank to settle old scores. This review is tainted by family drama, not facts. The words landed like a slap in open court, sharp and public, turning heads toward me while she sat back with that satisfied glint in her eye. She had initiated the attack exactly as she always did, framing me as the bitter one before I could even present evidence. My father shifted in his seat but said nothing. and my older sister Taylor actually smiled from the back like she had rehearsed this moment with her. I kept my voice steady when my turn came, laying out the files one by one. I described the faulty wiring changes that had saved my mother's company millions but cost lives, naming Private Ethan Gray and the 6 other soldiers whose families had never received real answers. Kevin Turner entered the room then and delivered his testimony without flinching, confirming every email, every deleted report, every time my mother had personally ordered safety concerns buried to keep contracts flowing. The board members flipped through the documents, faces growing tighter with each page. Captain Isabella Moore spoke briefly about the pattern across 9 different projects spanning 11 years, her words carrying the weight of someone who had seen the human cost up close. The room grew quiet except for the scratch of pens and the occasional gasp when another damning signature appeared on screen. My mother tried to interrupt twice, each time with another cutting jab directed straight at me. "This is exactly what I warned you about," she snapped during one break loud enough for the entire panel to hear. "You always chose drama over loyalty. Look what it has cost you now." The chairwoman warned her to stay professional, but the damage was done. The public exposure unfolded faster than I had imagined, with reporters scribbling furiously and whispers spreading through the hallway. By the afternoon, the board announced its decision. The $11 billion contract was suspended immediately. A full criminal probe into the company would begin within the week, and my mother's housing empire faced audits that would stretch on for months. Relief washed over me because the truth had finally broken through, but I knew the cost was already climbing higher than anyone could see. The major twist came 2 days later, when a sealed envelope arrived at my office from Internal Affairs. My mother had quietly filed a formal complaint weeks earlier, claiming I had abused my oversight position due to personal bias. She had dug up old performance notes from my early career, twisted them into questions about my judgment, and convinced a couple of board allies to launch a quiet review of my own record. The panel cleared me of any wrongdoing in the contract matter, but the complaint created enough doubt to stall my next promotion indefinitely. I had won the battle for the soldiers and exposed the shortcuts, yet the irreversible loss settled in like a heavy fog. My career, the one thing I had built without her help, now carried a permanent shadow because of her final calculated strike. My mother called that same evening, her voice colder than the Nebraska winter outside my window. "You got what you wanted," she said, each word deliberate and laced with venom. "The company is in ruins. My reputation is trashed, and for what? Some strangers who signed up knowing the risks. Do not ever contact me or your father again. As far as we are concerned, you stopped being part of this family the day you chose that uniform over us." My older sister Taylor followed up with a single text that simply read, "You made your choice. Live with it." I stared at the screen for a long time, realizing the family ties I had fought so hard to honor were now severed completely. My father never reached out again, choosing silence over any attempt at understanding. The partial victory tasted bittersweet because I had protected future soldiers and honored the memory of those we lost, but the price was the permanent fracture of the only family I had ever known. Captain Isabella Moore stopped by my quarters the following week with a quiet bottle of coffee and no judgment in her eyes. She reminded me that the investigation would continue and that Kevin Turner had already been offered protection for his testimony. We sat together talking about the soldiers whose names would finally get the attention they deserved, and for the first time in months, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. Private Ethan Gray's family sent a short note thanking me for speaking up, and that small connection helped more than any medal ever could. Yet every evening when the base grew quiet, I felt the absence of my mother's voice, even the critical one, and the empty space where holiday calls from my older sister Taylor used to land. The truth had set certain things free, but it had also closed doors that would never reopen. A year later, I transferred to a teaching post at the Army Leadership Academy in Missouri, focusing on integrity in procurement and the real cost of cutting corners. The work felt meaningful, even if the promotion I had earned on paper never materialized. because of that lingering shadow my mother had cast. I kept the old note from my grandmother tucked in my desk, its words still guiding me. Fight for purpose, not permission. Some mornings I wondered if my mother ever regretted the way she had chosen profit over people over me, but the silence from Omaha told me she had doubled down on her version of events. The family gatherings continued without me, and I learned to build new traditions with Captain Isabella Moore and a small circle of colleagues who understood what real loyalty looked like. I still believe exposing the lies was the right choice, but I carry the irreversible loss every single day. The mother who once laughed at my uniform now pretends I never existed, and the sister who chose her side over truth made sure the door stayed slammed shut. My father faded into the background, never strong enough to stand apart from her influence. In the end, I gained respect from the soldiers I served with and a clear conscience that no contract could buy. Yet I lost the last fragile threads of family that had once defined home. Choosing truth over comfort came with a price I had not fully calculated, but I would pay it again if it meant no more young privates had to die for someone else's bottom line. Thank you for listening to my story and for giving me the space to share what still hurts to remember. If you have ever faced a choice between loyalty and integrity, drop a comment below and tell me how it turned out for you. Your stories remind me I am not walking this path alone.